Welcome to the Hindu Daily. We're diving right into the stack of articles you shared with us today, and it's a fascinating mix. We're looking at technological ambition, ancient diplomacy, cosmic mysteries, and, well, some very modern challenges of transparency and fraud.
Exactly.
We're starting where global aspirations often falter, which is that chronic insufficiency in research and development that really challenges India's bid for global tech leadership.
It does. And we have some truly stark numbers here that they really illustrate the scale of this R&D deficit. It connects everything from economic sovereignty to the future viability of Viksit Bharat.
Right, a vision that really relies on an innovation muscle that maybe isn't there yet.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so let's unpack this because the contrast between potential and actual output is just massive. You look at the human capital, India has 17.5% of the world's population.
An enormous pool of talent.
An enormous pool. Yet we're only producing a meager 3% of global research output. That's a knowledge to population disparity you just can't ignore.
And that output gap is fundamentally rooted in an expenditure gap that is, frankly, far more severe. India's gross expenditure on R&D, or GER days it's called, it's been slipping. It hovers sluggishly between 0.6 and 0.7% of GDP.
Which sounds low, but how low is it really when you compare it globally?
It's alarmingly low.
Yeah.
When you benchmark that, you see just how far behind the pace we are. China's spending around 2.4%.
Okay.
The U.S. is at approximately 3.5%. And then you have an outlier like Israel, which dedicates over 5.4% of its GDP to R&D. We are, operating in a completely different universe in terms of dedicated resources.
And here's the most alarming data point from your sources, I think. This one really shows it's not just a national funding issue, but a difference in strategic intent.
You're talking about the Huawei comparison.
Yes. Compare India's entire national R&D expenditure, that's every public and private entity, to just one company. In 2023, Huawei invested $23.4 billion in R&D.
And that single corporate budget exceeds the total combined R&D expenditure of the entire Indian system.
One company outspent an entire country.
Precisely. The meaning of that is profound. I mean, one company views R&D as a mandate for survival and global dominance, while the entire Indian system, collectively, seems to view it as a secondary line item.
And that concentrated effort is exactly why NVIDIA's chairman, Jensen Huang, noted that Huawei is now just nanoseconds behind the U.S. in advanced semiconductors.
It tells you what focused investment can achieve, and it points immediately to the deep structural flaw that needs fixing.
The private sector.
The abysmal role of the private sector. In developed economies, industry drives innovation. It accounts for 2/3 or more of the spending. In India, the government is still the main driver at 63.6%.
Leaving the private sector at a pretty risk-averse 36.4%. They'd rather make incremental improvements or just license foreign tech.
It's safer. It prioritizes low risk over disruptive innovation. And we also see that persistent problem of the academia-industry disconnect.
Ah, the valley of death.
That's it. Valuable public research often just sits in a silo. It struggles to cross that gap between a lab discovery and, a viable product in the market. The sources even mention N.R. Narayana Murthy's report on this.
Gathering dust, sadly.
So if we connect this to the ambition of becoming a tech leader, the path forward requires R&D spending to hit 2% of GDP in the next 5 to 7 years. And the private sector has to step up, contributing at least 50% of that total.
So it's about strategic national missions.
Yes, in semiconductors, AI, quantum computing, green energy, all supported by that new 1 lakh crore RDI fund. That money needs to be used to change the risk profile for industry.
Okay, so that sets a very demanding technological baseline. Now, shifting gears entirely, we're moving from the strategic infrastructure of tech to the strategic infrastructure of global diplomacy, specifically the Indo-Iranian relationship.
And this is a relationship that feels far less transactional than others, doesn't it? It's rooted so deeply in history.
It's described as an ongoing dialogue between two ancient civilizations that emerged from a shared cultural womb.
The historical depth is immense. You see it in the cultural influence of Persian on India, giving rise to the Indian style, or Sabki Hindi, in literature. You have poets like Mirza Abdul Qadir Bedel Delavi.
So what's important today is how those deep historical ties translate into critical, modern, strategic drivers.
Right. Energy security obviously is paramount. Iran's hydrocarbon reserves are vast. But the most consequential area of cooperation, especially for India's Eurasian trade ambitions, is transport and connectivity.
This is where Chabahar Port comes in.
That's where the Chabahar Port development becomes absolutely critical. Iran forms a vital link in the International North-South Transport Corridor, the INSTC.
And this is a potential game changer.
A huge game changer. It offers a significant competitive edge over the traditional sea route. The INSTC is approximately 40% shorter.
40%.
And 30% more cost-efficient than shipping goods via the Suez Canal route.
But given the constant pressure from external constraints, the geopolitical volatility, is a strategy focused on Chabahar overly vulnerable? Or are these mechanisms like the INSTC resilient enough to bypass those issues?
That's the key question, isn't it? Resilience. Both nations share mutual security concerns, like extremism and terrorism, which compels them to cooperate. But the long-term imperative is clearly diversification beyond just oil.
Focusing on things like knowledge-based industries.
Exactly. IT, nanotechnology, medical sciences, and strengthening flexible financial mechanisms like trade and local currencies to minimize that vulnerability to external sanctions.
Okay, so from terrestrial strategy and ancient ties, let's catapult ourselves to the deepest parts of the cosmos. Indian astronomers have made a discovery with the James Webb Space Telescope that is actively challenging our fundamental models of galactic evolution.
We're talking about Alaknanda. It's the second farthest spiral galaxy ever found, and it's named after a tributary of the Ganga, connecting it conceptually to our own Milky Way, which is sometimes called Mandakini.
And what an astronomical puzzle Alaknanda presents. Astronomers determined it's a fully developed spiral galaxy. It has two perfectly symmetrical arms, a small central bulge, but it formed incredibly early.
Incredibly early. It appeared only 1.5 billion years after the Big Bang.
I need some context on that. How early is that, really?
Well, astronomers use redshift, or Z. The higher the Z value, the further away and further back in time we're looking. Alaknanda is at redshift Z's of about 4.
Okay.
That means it's a fully formed teenage galaxy when, according to all our existing simulations, it should still be an infant, a chaotic blob. Current models suggest the stable, rotating disks you need for those beautiful spiral arms should take billions of years to form, not just 1.5 billion.
So the universe is basically telling us our recipe for making galaxies is incomplete.
That's a perfect way to put it. And the analysis shows Alaknanda is forming new stars at an incredible rate, about 60 solar masses per year.
So what's the scientific utility of a mismatch like this? Does it just break the models?
Well, Professor Kulkarni described galaxy formation as a complex system problem, kind of like predicting the weather. The mismatch between what we observe and what our simulations predict is actually extremely useful.
How so?
Because it shows us precisely which ingredients need refinement. It tells scientists where to focus their future calculations.
So how did Alaknanda accelerate its development so much? What are the possible ingredients they're looking at?
There are two main theories on the table. First, steady growth, where the galaxy just steadily drew in cold gas, which quickly settled into a stable, rotating disk.
And the second?
The second is an interaction or even a merger with a smaller companion galaxy, which could have triggered the arm formation. But the consensus is that, well, even with these accelerated pathways, Alaknanda still formed way faster than it should have.
The findings, based on photometric analysis and 3 independent redshift measurements, they sound robust. But is Alaknanda definitively a spiral? Or could it be something else?
That's the million-dollar question. We need more data. To confirm its structure isn't just a chance alignment of clumpy features. Astronomers need spectroscopic analysis, like from GWST's integral field unit images.
And what does this discovery mean for Indian astronomy?
It's important. It highlights a growing ambition. Historically, India has had a limited presence in major JWST finds, due to a smaller workforce and lower funding. The strategy to catch up now is two-pronged. Build domestic facilities and join large multinational projects like the SKA and LEGO.
Okay. That jump from seeking galactic transparency to confronting systemic opacity here on Earth needs a bit of a bridge. So speaking of systems vital for national strategy and ones that demand extreme transparency, let's look at the crucial building blocks of those tech aspirations we talked about earlier, rare earth elements.
Right. First, let's just define them. Rare earth elements, or REs, are the 15 lanthanides plus scandium and yttrium, so 17 in total.
And they're the chemical backbone of modern tech.
Absolutely. Especially for high-performance magnets, like neodymium iron boron, which are crucial for motors and generators in EVs and wind turbines, and phosphors, which give us those sharp, stable colors in screens, using elements like europium and terbium.
The physics behind why they're so useful is what makes them indispensable, right?
It is. They have this special internal structure where their 4 cell electrons are localized and shielded. In simple terms, think of it like their magnetism is locked in place.
Which means they stay powerful even when they get really hot inside an engine or a generator.
Exactly. They maintain that strong magnetic moment, ensuring they remain incredibly stable and efficient. Now, what's fascinating here is that the challenge isn't physical scarcity. These elements are not actually rare in the ground.
The problem is chemistry.
The problem's all chemistry. They are so chemically similar, and they're all mixed together in the same ores. This is where the separation difficulty arises. You can't treat it like oil refining, where you use physical separation like fractional distillation because boiling points are so different.
Here, you need highly specific, high-purity metals, and one element can't just substitute for another.
Correct. And the separation process is incredibly arduous. After the initial steps of crushing, grinding, and chemical cracking with strong acids and bases, you get to the hardest part, high-purity separation using what's called solvent extraction.
And that's not a simple process.
Not at all. It's a marathon. It involves repeatedly running liquid solutions and organic solvents through dozens, sometimes hundreds, of separation stages. You're trying to pull out elements one by one based on these minute differences in their chemical behavior.
And it's environmentally complicated too, I imagine.
Very. The ores often co-occur with thorium or uranium, which can make the waste streams radioactive.
So this complex, difficult midstream process is the key vulnerability. This is why China accounts for around 91% of global separation and refining.
Despite holding only 44 million tons of global reserves, while India holds 6.9 million. The real insight here is that owning the resources is almost irrelevant if you can't refine them.
Strategy, therefore, has to prioritize building that domestic refinement and magnet-making capacity.
Exactly. The focus has to shift from just mining the ore to mastering that specialized midstream processing.
The difficulty in auditing these complex chemical systems, which demand extreme transparency, it speaks to a larger problem of systemic transparency. So shifting gears to look at a systemic risk to democracy, how political persuasion is shifting in the digital sphere. We're talking about the digital erosion of election oversight.
This is a crucial area because the traditional election rulebook is, well, it's fixated on official parties and candidates. But influence is increasingly mediated by unregulated third-party actors.
Campaign firms, influencers, interest groups.
Exactly, and they operate outside those formal regulatory structures.
Let's look at the hard evidence from the Bihar Assembly election data. This is analyzed using Meta's ads library, and it really quantifies the problem. Among the 55 top spenders, those spending over 1 lakh rupees, only 23 were official parties or candidates.
A staggering 32 were third-party campaigners operating in the shadows.
And these third parties were more than just numerous. They were vastly more effective, weren't they?
Oh, much more. They achieved far greater visibility, generating nearly twice the average impressions of official pages. And crucially, they were markedly more cost-efficient. They generated 2.60 crore impressions per 10 lakh rupees spent versus only 1.54 crore for official pages.
So communicative power is dramatically shifting to these unaccountable external entities.
It is. And this highlights a really unaccountable nexus. The sources point to direct financial entanglements, where external entities like one called the Spectrum sponsor ads that appear directly on official party pages, like those of Janata Dal United.
Which risks understating the official campaign expenditure.
And creates a critical accountability gap. The Supreme Court prohibits any entity from publishing ads for the benefit of a party, but the Election Commission guidelines failed to apply this standard comprehensively to these third-party actors.
This leads to what the source calls the fundamental inversion problem.
That's right. Parties must report what they spend, but they are not required to disclose what others spend on their behalf. This allows a huge amount of political influence to remain formally invisible.
That gap in oversight is a substantial threat to transparency. Finally, we turn to a story that combines audacious self-promotion with high-stakes fraud. It illustrates the darker side of aspiration and the persuasive power of a sophisticated lie. The case of the false IAS officer.
This is the story of Gaurav Kumar Singh, alias Lali Kishore. He's 27. He managed to maintain this immense facade, proclaiming himself an IAS officer outside his modest rented home. He was drawing visitors in cars and sustaining a powerful atmosphere of officialdom and, well, false meritocracy.
The scale of his operation was just extraordinary for a fake officer. It must have cost him a fortune every month.
It did. He had a 10 to 15 member entourage paid up to 30,000 rupees monthly, plus a software professional brother-in-law he called Stinobabu, who got 60,000. Lalit was spending about 5 lakh rupees a month just to sustain this charade.
And using forged IDs and AI-generated photos to replace real officials' faces.
To add that veneer of authenticity. And he was running multi-crore scams to fund this lifestyle. The biggest one we know of involved taking a staggering 5 crore rupee bribe from a contractor named Mukund Madhav.
Promising him a 450 crore government tender.
Exactly. Lalit was only arrested after Madhav himself was caught with nearly 1 crore in cash, which was part of the return bribe money when the promised tender failed to materialize.
What makes this story so powerful, I think, is the immense contradiction in his background.
It's stunning. He is the 4th of 5 sons of a cobbler from Sitamarhi, Bihar, who died in 2020. His family lives in extreme poverty in a rickety dwelling. They've completely disowned him.
And their statement was just chilling. What he sowed, so shall he reap.
A cold reality. And his escalation into serious fraud shows a clear trajectory of exploiting trust. He started a coaching institute, eloped with a student. His first known serious crime was in Banka district, promising a student a government job for 2 lakh, then duping his landlord for 10 lakh before disappearing.
He then just resurfaces, claiming to have cracked the prestigious UPSC 2022 exam. He shifts his base across 4 states, dupes at least 40 people for crores.
And the personal deception was just as pervasive. Evidence from his seized phone shows 3 different women he chatted with are currently pregnant. All 3 core conspirators have now been arrested.
This deep dive has presented a really fascinating dichotomy, one that sort of defines a nation's current trajectory. On one hand, massive technological and scientific aspirations funding the next generation of R&D, discovering Alaknanda.
And on the other, you have these serious systemic vulnerabilities. The opacity of shadow campaigns, and the persistent threat of high-stakes fraud, like the sophisticated lie perpetuated by the false IAS officer.
What stands out to you is the sheer effort required to build a transparent, functional future based on meritocracy. The challenge isn't just finding the enormous capital required to fund the next Huawei or discover the next Alaknanda.
No, it's about ensuring the very foundations of democracy and trust aren't easily exploited by digital opacity, or just the persuasive power of a sophisticated lie that targets those who desperately seek a shortcut.
Something for you to mull over today. Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.